What happens when the stranger you save from death turns out to be the man who destroyed everything you loved? On a night when Wyoming's fury could kill, Lena Carter pulled a dying man from twisted metal and brought him into her falling-apart cabin. She didn't know his name, didn't know his face, just knew he'd freeze if she didn't act. By morning, when his wallet dried by the fire, she learned the truth. Adrian Cross, billionaire, CEO. The man whose company stole her father's land and left him broken. Now they're trapped together. And some storms don't end when the snow stops falling. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. Lena Carter pressed her shoulder against the cabin door, fighting the gale that wanted to rip it from its hinges. Snow came sideways, hard as gravel, stinging every inch of exposed skin. She'd lived in these Wyoming mountains for 30 years, 28 of them in this exact cabin, and she'd never heard wind like this. It sounded angry, hungry. The door slammed shut. She threw the bolt and leaned against it, breathing hard, her fingers already numb despite the gloves. The cabin creaked around her like an old ship in rough water. Somewhere above, a shingle tore loose and vanished into the darkness. She should have left yesterday. Should have driven down to town when the weather service started using words like historic and life-threatening. But town meant people, and people meant questions she didn't want to answer, looks she didn't want to see. Besides, she'd weathered bad storms before. This cabin had stood for 60 years. It would stand through one more night. The power had died an hour ago. Now there was just the fire, throwing wild shadows across walls that needed paint, across furniture that had been old when her father bought it. Lena moved to the hearth and fed in another log, watching sparks spiral up the chimney. The wood was getting low. She'd need to make a run to the shed before light flashed outside. Not lightning, wrong color, wrong duration. Lena froze, one hand still on the poker. There it was again. Fainter this time, flickering through the trees down the mountain road. Headlights. No, she whispered. Don't be stupid. Turn around. But even as she said it, she knew from the erratic movement, the way the lights dipped and swerved. Someone was trying to make it up the mountain road in this. Someone who didn't know that road turned into an ice-slicked death trap in weather like this, that there was nothing up here but her cabin and 1,000 ways to die. The lights disappeared. Not gradually, just gone, like someone flipped a switch. Lena stood motionless, poker still in hand, listening to the wind tear at the cabin. Maybe they'd turned around. Maybe they'd found a pullout somewhere to wait out the storm. Maybe... The sound came thin and distant, barely audible over the gale. Metal crunching, glass breaking. Then nothing. She should stay inside. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. Going out in this storm was insane. She didn't owe anything to some idiot who'd ignored every warning and tried to drive up a mountain in a blizzard. She didn't even know if anyone was hurt. Could have been a deer hitting a car, a branch falling, anything. Lena looked at the fire, looked at the door, looked at her father's old coat hanging on its peg. Damn it! She grabbed the coat, shoved her arms through sleeves that still smelled faintly of tobacco and motor oil even after 5 years. Found the heavy flashlight, checked the batteries. Pulled on her thickest boots. The wind hit her like a fist the second she opened the door. It knocked her back a step, filled her lungs with ice. The cold was beyond cold. It was a physical thing, a predator with teeth. Lena ducked her head and pushed forward, one hand on the porch railing, feeling her way to the steps. The road was somewhere ahead, down the slope through the trees. She knew this land like she knew her own hands, knew where the ground dipped, where the rocks jutted up, where the pine roots made ankle breakers in the dark. She'd walked it 1,000 times. Never in a whiteout, never when she couldn't see 5 feet in front of her face. The flashlight helped, but not much. The beam just made the snow look thicker, turned the world into a swirling white void. Lena moved slowly, testing each step. One hand stretched out in front of her. A branch whipped across her face, drawing blood she couldn't feel yet. She kept going. How far had those lights been? Quarter mile? Half? Distance played tricks at night, worse in a storm. Could have been. Her boot hit something that wasn't ground, something smooth, curved, metal. Lena swept the flashlight down and saw chrome bumper, saw black paint under fresh snow, saw a tire still spinning slowly in space. The SUV had left the road and rolled, coming to rest against a cluster of pines that had kept it from sliding further down the mountain. The driver's side was crushed inward, the windshield a spider web of cracks. She stumbled forward, nearly falling on the ice, and pressed her face to the passenger window. The glass was fogged, but she could make out a shape slumped over the steering wheel, not moving. "Hey!" She pounded on the window. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. Lena grabbed the door handle and pulled, locked. She moved around to the driver's side where the frame had buckled. The door hung half open, bent on its hinges. She wedged herself into the gap and pulled harder, metal screaming, until there was just enough space to reach inside. The man was big, which was going to be a problem. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like expensive outdoor gear that had done exactly nothing to prepare him for this. His face was pressed against the deployed airbag, already deflating. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, freezing as it dripped. Lena pulled off her glove and pressed 2 fingers to his neck below the jaw. There. Faint, but there. Pulse. "Okay," she said, more to herself than him. "Okay, we're doing this." She unclipped his seatbelt and tried to pull him toward her. He didn't budge, dead weight, and a lot of it. She repositioned, got both arms under his shoulders, planted her feet, and hauled. He moved maybe 6 inches. The wind shrieked through the trees. Snow was already starting to pile up on the man's legs, on the seats, on everything. In another 20 minutes, this whole wreck would be buried. In an hour, frozen solid. Lena pulled again, harder this time, feeling something in her back pop. The man's head lolled against her shoulder. She got him halfway out before her boots lost traction, and she went down hard, him on top of her, both of them sprawling in the snow. She lay there for a second, pinned, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her lip. The man's face was inches from hers. He looked younger than she'd expected. Early 30s, maybe? Dark hair, strong features, the kind of face you'd see in a magazine selling watches or cologne. The kind of face that had never known a day of real trouble. "You picked a hell of a night to be stupid," she told him. He didn't answer. Lena wiggled out from under him and stood, every muscle screaming. The cabin was uphill, maybe 300 yards through the trees. In good weather, an easy walk. In this, carrying an unconscious man who probably weighed 200 pounds? She bent down, grabbed him under the arms, and started dragging. The first 100 yards were the worst. The ground sloped up, and the snow had already piled into drifts that came up to her knees in places. Lena pulled, rested, pulled again. Her shoulders burned, her lungs burned. The wind kept trying to knock her down, and twice it succeeded. Both times she got back up, got her grip on the man's jacket, and kept going. Halfway there, she had to stop. Had to. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges, her hands shaking so hard she could barely keep hold of the fabric. The man's face had gone from pale to gray. Frost was forming in his hair, on his eyebrows. "Don't you die," she gasped. "Don't you dare die on me." She pulled. The cabin appeared through the snow like a miracle, like a lighthouse in fog. Lena dragged the man up the porch steps. The sound of his boots hitting each riser would stay with her later, and shouldered the door open. Heat hit her face like a slap. She pulled him inside, kicked the door shut, and collapsed next to him on the floor. For a long moment, she just lay there, listening to her heart hammer, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling. Then she made herself move. The man first. He was hypothermic, probably had been before the crash. Lena had seen it before, in hunters who stayed out too long, in hikers who underestimated the mountains. You had maybe an hour, sometimes less, to bring the core temperature back up. After that, organs started shutting down. She dragged him closer to the fire and started stripping off his wet clothes. The jacket came first, North Face, probably cost more than her truck. Then the sweater, the thermal layer underneath. His skin was ice to the touch, lips blue, no shivering. That was bad. Shivering meant the body was still fighting. No shivering meant it was giving up. Lena ran to her bedroom and grabbed every blanket she owned, plus the sleeping bag from the closet. She piled them over him, then added more wood to the fire, building it up until heat rolled off in waves. The cabin filled with smoke until she adjusted the flue. Her hands were shaking again, but not from cold this time. She didn't know what else to do. In movies, they always did skin-to-skin contact, but that seemed insane. She didn't know this man, didn't know anything except that he'd been stupid enough to drive up a mountain in a blizzard, and lucky enough that she'd been crazy enough to drag him back, but his lips were still blue. Damn it! Lena stripped down to her base layer and crawled under the blankets next to him, pressing close. His skin was like lying next to a corpse. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, sharing what little heat she had left. Time did strange things. Could have been 10 minutes or an hour. She drifted in and out, exhausted beyond measure, barely aware of the wind still hammering the cabin, of the fire popping and crackling. At some point she felt him shiver, a good sign, then shiver harder. That's it, she murmured. Come on. His eyes moved beneath closed lids. His breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, started to even out. Color began creeping back into his face. Lena let herself relax, just a fraction. He was going to make it. Probably. Maybe. She'd done what she could. She must have dozed off, because when she opened her eyes again, the fire had burned down to coals and pale gray light was leaking through the windows. Morning. The storm had quieted to occasional gusts, the worst of it blown past, and the man was watching her. Lena jerked back, suddenly very aware that she was pressed up against a complete stranger wearing nothing but long underwear. The man blinked at her, confusion written across his face. Where? His voice came out as a croak. He swallowed and tried again. Where am I? My cabin. Lena grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around herself, putting distance between them. You crashed on the mountain road last night. He looked around slowly, taking in the rough walls, the old furniture, the dying fire. When his gaze came back to her, there was something sharp in it, assessing. Not the look of someone who'd just cheated death. The look of someone doing calculations. You pulled me out. Yeah. In that storm. You would have died otherwise. He studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. Thank you. The words sounded sincere, but Lena didn't trust them. Didn't trust the expensive gear, the new SUV, the way he looked at her cabin like he was pricing everything in it. She'd seen that look before. Can you sit up? She asked. He tried, winced, and made it halfway before his arms gave out. Head spinning. Probably a concussion. You hit the wheel pretty hard. Lena moved to the kitchen and filled a pot with water from the jug by the sink. The power was still out, but she could heat it over the fire. You remember what happened? I was driving. There was ice. He paused. That's it. You're lucky the trees stopped you. Another 50 feet and you would have gone over the ridge. She hung the pot on the iron hook above the coals and pushed them around with the poker, building the heat back up. Behind her, she heard the man shifting, the rustle of blankets. When she turned, he was sitting upright, one hand pressed to his head, the other clutching a blanket around his shoulders. His clothes were draped over chairs by the fire, still damp. His wallet had fallen from the jacket pocket. Lena had set it on the hearth to dry. The man saw it at the same time she did. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he reached for it. Lena got there first. She didn't mean to, didn't plan it. But her hand closed around the leather before his did. And when she flipped it open to check if the cards inside had survived, the name on the driver's license punched the air from her lungs. Adrian Cross. The wallet fell from her fingers. Hey, are you? The man, Adrian, started to stand, but Lena was already backing away, her vision tunneling, her pulse hammering in her ears. Adrian Cross, CEO of Cross Development Corporation. The company that had bought her father's land through fraud and legal tricks, that had buried him in paperwork and debt until the stress literally killed him. She'd seen that name on 1,000 documents, on the lawsuit papers her father couldn't afford to fight, on the death certificate that listed heart failure but should have said killed by corporate greed. You. The word came out strangled. You're Adrian Cross. His expression shifted, surprise giving way to something more guarded. Yes. Get out. What? Get out! The words tore from her throat, louder than she'd meant, but she didn't care. Get out of my house! Adrian held up both hands, blanket slipping from his shoulders. I don't understand. What did I... Your company destroyed my father. Lena grabbed his jacket from the chair and threw it at him. It hit the floor between them. Cross Development, the land deal 5 years ago. Richard Carter. Remember him? Remember the man whose property you stole? Something flickered across Adrian's face. Recognition. Or maybe just calculation. I remember the name. The name. Lena's laugh came out bitter. That's what he was to you. A name on a form, a signature to forge, another piece of land to add to your empire. I don't forge signatures. No, you just hire people who do. Must be nice having that distance, never getting your hands dirty. She grabbed his boots next, threw them too. Get dressed, get out. There's a blizzard outside. Should have thought of that before you drove up here. I'll freeze. Good. Adrian went very still. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. I don't know what you think happened with your father's land, but I can assure you— Don't! Lena cut him off. Don't you dare stand there and assure me of anything. I saw the documents. I watched my father try to fight it, watched him lose everything, watched him die from the stress of it all. So whatever corporate line you're about to feed me, save it. She expected him to argue, expected denials, threats, maybe even anger. Instead, Adrian just looked at her with those calculating eyes and said, Richard Carter, the Montana Valley property, 2021. The fact that he remembered, that he could pull it up that easily, made it worse somehow, made it real. Get out, Lena said again, but the fury was draining from her voice, leaving just exhaustion. I will. Adrian reached for his clothes, moving slowly. Soon as the storm clears enough to walk, but I want you to know something first. I don't want to hear it. I came to Wyoming to investigate my own company. He pulled on his pants, his thermal top, moving like every muscle ached. Probably they did. There's been corruption, fraud. I've suspected it for months, but I couldn't prove it without coming here myself, without seeing the records in person. Convenient story. It's the truth. He picked up his jacket, shook off the snow that had melted into puddles on the floor. I have documents in my car. Evidence. If I can get to them, your car's buried in a snowdrift. Then, when the snow melts. It won't melt for days. Adrian met her eyes. Then I guess we're stuck with each other. The words hung between them like a challenge. Outside, wind rattled the windows, reminding them both what waited beyond these walls. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, the only sound besides their breathing. Lena wanted to throw him out anyway, wanted to watch him stumble into the snow, wanted him to feel a fraction of what her father felt. But she wasn't that person. Wasn't sure she could be, even for him. You sleep on the floor, she said finally. Don't talk to me. Don't touch anything. Soon as there's a break in the weather, you're gone. Adrian nodded once. Fair enough. She turned away from him, moved to the kitchen, started pulling out what little food she had. Canned soup, crackers, some jerky that was probably past its prime. The water over the fire was starting to steam. Behind her, she heard Adrian settling back down, heard the rustle of blankets. When she glanced over her shoulder, he was watching the fire with an expression she couldn't read. For a second, he looked almost human. Almost like someone who might be telling the truth about investigating corruption, about not knowing what his company had done. Then she remembered the documents, the lawsuits. Her father's hands shaking as he signed away everything he'd built. Lena turned back to the soup. Outside, the storm picked up again, wind howling around the cabin like something alive. Like something that knew exactly how much trouble they were in and how much worse it was going to get before it got better. The cabin creaked. Adrian coughed, and Lena stood at her father's stove, stirring soup in her father's pot, watching the man who'd destroyed their lives warm himself by the fire she'd saved him to reach. Some storms, she thought, don't end when the snow stops falling. Some storms were just getting started. The soup tasted like metal. Or maybe that was just Lena's mouth, still bleeding from where she'd bitten it during the rescue. She ate mechanically, standing at the counter, refusing to sit at the table where Adrian had positioned himself with his bowl. He ate slowly, like someone who'd been taught manners mattered even when you were half frozen and concussed. The silence stretched between them, thick and hostile. The power will be out for days, Lena said finally, not looking at him. Lines are probably down all over the mountain. Phone too. Adrian glanced at his cell phone, sitting dead on the hearth next to his wallet. No signal anyway. Never is up here. You live like this all the time? The question irritated her more than it should have. I manage. I didn't mean— He stopped, seemed to reconsider. It must be hard. Alone out here. I like being alone. Clearly, Lena turned to face him then, spoon still in hand. You got something to say? Adrian met her eyes over the rim of his bowl, just making an observation. Make them quieter. She saw his jaw tighten, saw him bite back whatever response he'd been forming. Good. Let him sit there and choke on his expensive manners and his corporate sympathy. Let him feel a fraction as uncomfortable as she did having him in her home. Outside, the wind had died down to occasional gusts, but the sky remained the color of old bruises. More snow coming. Lena could feel it in the air and the pressure behind her eyes. They were in for at least another day of this. Maybe two. Maybe more. 2 days trapped with Adrian Cross. She finished her soup and set the bowl in the sink with more force than necessary. The cabin was too small. Everywhere she looked, there he was, taking up space with his expensive clothes and his careful movements and the quiet way he studied everything, like he was cataloging it for later use. I need to check on the animals, she said. Adrian looked up. Animals? Chickens. They're in the shed out back. She grabbed her father's coat again, still damp from the night before, but better than nothing. Probably terrified from the storm. I'll help. No. You pulled me out of a snowbank last night. Least I can do is help with your chickens. I don't want your help. You're going to get it anyway. Adrian stood, wincing as his weight settled on what was probably a bruised leg. Where's your other coat? Lena wanted to argue, but the truth was she could use another pair of hands. The shed roof had been questionable before the storm, and if it had collapsed, she'd need help digging the birds out. Still, accepting help from him felt like giving ground in a war she couldn't afford to lose. Closet by the door, she said. Might be too small. It was too small. Adrian managed to get the old canvas jacket on, but the sleeves ended halfway up his forearms, and he couldn't button it closed. He looked ridiculous, this polished CEO in workman's clothes that didn't fit, and Lena felt a mean little spark of satisfaction. Let's go, she said. The world outside had transformed overnight. Snow lay in drifts higher than Lena's waist, sculpted by wind into strange shapes that looked almost deliberate. The trees drooped under white weight, branches bent to breaking. The shed was barely visible through the powder, just a dark lump against the hillside. They waded through it, Adrian following in Lena's tracks. She could hear him breathing hard behind her, struggling. Good, let him struggle. The shed door was buried. Lena grabbed the shovel she kept on the porch and started digging, throwing snow aside in steady rhythm. Adrian watched for a moment, then picked up the other shovel and joined her. They worked in silence, the only sounds their breathing and the scrape of metal on wood. Lena was acutely aware of him beside her, matching her pace, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from someone who'd done physical labor before. That surprised her. She'd expected soft hands and complaints. Got it, Adrian said, pulling the door free. Inside, the chickens huddled together in the far corner, ruffled and anxious, but alive. The roof had held. Lena felt tension she hadn't known she was carrying drain from her shoulders. They okay? Adrian asked. Yeah. She scattered feed from the bin by the door, watched the birds scramble for it. Tougher than they look. Like their owner. Lena shot him a look, but he wasn't smiling, just stating a fact, his expression neutral. She didn't know what to do with that, so she ignored it. They checked the water, made sure the heat lamp was still working off the backup battery. The chickens settled down as they ate, their panic fading. Lena counted them twice, making sure none had been lost. All accounted for. We should get back, she said, before it starts again. Adrian nodded and followed her out. She was pulling the door shut when he spoke. I really am here to investigate the company. Lena's hand stilled on the latch. Don't. There's a land development project. Big one. Mountain resort, luxury cabins, the works. It's been in the pipeline for months, but something felt wrong about the approval process. Too smooth, too fast. He paused. I've seen it before. That's why I came myself instead of sending someone. Congratulations, you're very thorough. Your father's land... Stop. Lena turned to face him, snow falling between them like static. You think I care about your investigation? You think knowing you're cleaning house now makes up for what happened 5 years ago? No, Adrian said quietly. I don't think that. Then what do you want? Absolution? Forgiveness? I want you to understand that I didn't know. Not then. Not until it was too late. Too late, Lena repeated. That's a nice way of saying you didn't care enough to look. Something flashed across Adrian's face, something that might have been anger or guilt or both. You're right. I should have looked closer, should have questioned things more. I was. He stopped, jaw working. I had other things on my mind. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. What other things? My daughter. The words hung in the freezing air between them. Lena hadn't expected that, hadn't expected him to offer anything personal. It threw her off balance. How old? She asked before she could stop herself. 7 now. She was 3 when your father lost his land. Adrian's voice went flat. Her mother had just died. Cancer. I was trying to run a company and raise a kid who barely understood why mommy wasn't coming home. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted because I didn't have the energy to do anything else. Lena felt something twist in her chest, something that might have been sympathy if she let it be. But sympathy for him meant betraying her father's memory, and she wouldn't do that. Everyone's got a sob story, she said. Doesn't change what happened. No, Adrian agreed. It doesn't. They walked back to the cabin without speaking. The wind picked up again as they reached the porch, and the first flakes of new snow began to fall. Lena looked at the gray sky and knew they were in for another round. Inside, the fire had burned low again. Lena built it back up while Adrian peeled off the too small jacket. She could feel him watching her, could feel the weight of things unsaid pressing against the walls. I need to work, Adrian said finally. I have files, documents. They're in my car. Your buried car. I could dig it out. You could kill yourself trying. Lena stabbed at the fire, sending sparks up. Storm's coming back. You go out there now, you won't make it back. Then tomorrow. Maybe. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat heavily, pressing his fingers to his temples. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding but left a dark purple bruise spreading across his forehead. You should rest, Lena said, surprising herself. That concussion isn't going to fix itself. I'll rest when I have the files. Stubborn. Look who's talking. The almost smile that flickered across his face irritated her. She didn't want him to have a sense of humor. Didn't want him to be anything other than the corporate monster she'd built in her mind over 5 years of grief and rage. But he was there, in her cabin, making observations about her chickens and talking about his dead wife and his daughter, and it was getting harder to hold on to the clean edges of her anger. The day crawled by. Lena tried to stay busy, but there was only so much to do in a one-room cabin. She reorganized the pantry, checked the water supply, mended a tear in one of the blankets, all while acutely aware of Adrian sitting at the table, staring at nothing, clearly frustrated by his lack of access to whatever corporate war he was fighting. Around midday, the new storm hit in earnest. Snow fell thick and fast, erasing what little visibility they'd had. The wind returned with a vengeance, making the cabin walls groan. This is normal? Adrian asked, watching the whiteout through the window. For Wyoming? Yeah. How do you stand it? You get used to it. Lena paused in her mending. Or you don't, and you leave. Most people leave. But not you. This was my father's place. Before that, my grandfather's. Someone's got to stay. Adrian turned from the window. Even if staying means being alone? The question hit closer than Lena wanted to admit. She focused on threading the needle, pulling the torn edges of the blanket together. Alone's better than some alternatives. Is it? In my experience. She could feel him studying her, could feel the weight of his analysis. It made her skin itch, made her want to snap at him to stop looking at her like she was a problem to solve. What? She said finally, not looking up. Nothing. Doesn't sound like nothing. Adrian was quiet for a beat. You remind me of someone. Let me guess. Your daughter's nanny, your secretary, some other woman whose life you controlled. Myself, Adrian said. You remind me of myself. That made Lena look up. I'm nothing like you. No? He leaned back in the chair, wincing at the movement. You're angry at the world. You're hiding from it up here. You've convinced yourself that isolation is strength and that letting anyone close is weakness. He paused. That sound familiar? You don't know anything about me. I know what I see. What you see is someone who saved your life and is now stuck with you until the snow melts. Don't mistake proximity for insight. But the words bothered her more than they should have, because he wasn't entirely wrong, and that was the worst part. She had been hiding, had been for 5 years, ever since the funeral, ever since the day she'd scattered her father's ashes on the land he'd loved and lost. The afternoon wore on. The storm didn't let up. Lena made more soup from the dwindling supplies, and they ate again in silence, the space between them charged with things neither would say. Night fell early, the way it did in winter. Lena lit the oil lamp she kept for emergencies, and the cabin filled with warm, flickering light that made everything feel smaller, more intimate. "Tell me about the investigation," she said suddenly. Adrian looked up from where he'd been staring into the fire. "What?" "Your corruption case, the land deal. Tell me about it." "Why?" "Because I'm bored. Because we're stuck here. Because—" She stopped, searching for the real reason. "Because maybe I want to know if you're actually trying to fix things or if this is just more corporate PR." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right." He told her about the discrepancies he'd noticed. Properties acquired too easily, permits approved too quickly, environmental surveys that looked rubber-stamped. He told her about digging through files late at night after his daughter went to bed, about cross-referencing records and finding gaps that shouldn't exist. "I narrowed it down to 3 people in the company," he said. 2 in legal, 1 in acquisitions. But I couldn't prove anything without the physical documents. Wyoming keeps paper records for land deals, even now. Everything gets filed at the county office. That's why you drove up here in a blizzard. The weather was supposed to hold until tomorrow. He gave a rueful smile. I miscalculated. No kidding. But I got what I needed, or most of it. The documents are in a case in my trunk. Evidence of falsified surveys, forged signatures, the works. He paused. Including records from your father's land transfer. Lena's breath caught. You have proof? That it was fraud? I think so. I won't know for sure until I can review everything properly. And then what? You fire the people responsible and move on? And then I make it right, Adrian said quietly. However I can. You can't bring my father back. No. But I can make sure what happened to him doesn't happen to anyone else. The sincerity in his voice made Lena's throat tight. She stood abruptly, moving to the window, looking out at nothing but darkness and falling snow. Behind her, she heard Adrian shift in his chair. I had a director, he said. Stephen Marsh. He ran acquisitions for 10 years. I trusted him completely. When my wife got sick, when I was barely keeping my head above water, he stepped up. Handled things I couldn't handle. I thought he was being a good friend. He was the one who stole the land. I think so, but I need the documents to prove it. Lena pressed her forehead against the cold glass. My father tried to fight it, spent every cent he had on lawyers. They buried him in motions and delays until he couldn't afford to keep going. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't help. I know. They lapsed into silence again. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire crackled and the oil lamps flickered, and 2 people who should have been enemies sat in the warm darkness, neither quite sure what they were anymore. Lena woke sometime in the deepest part of night to the sound of Adrian crying out. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, crossing to where he lay tangled in blankets by the fire, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. No, he muttered. No, please. Nightmare. Lena hesitated, then reached out and shook his shoulder. Hey, wake up. Adrian's eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a second, he didn't seem to know where he was. Then recognition filtered in, followed by embarrassment. Sorry, he said, his voice rough. I'm sorry. You were dreaming. Yeah. He sat up slowly, pushing hair back from his forehead. His hands were shaking. Lena should have gone back to bed, should have let him deal with whatever demons he was fighting on his own. Instead, she sat down on the floor next to him, keeping a careful distance. Want to talk about it? She asked. No. Okay. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn. After a while, Adrian spoke. It's always the same dream. I'm driving, and Emma, my daughter, is in the back seat. But no matter how carefully I drive, I can't keep the car on the road. We slide, and I can't stop it, and... He stopped, swallowing hard. She's calling for me, and I can't reach her. You're trying to protect her. I can't protect her from everything. That's what the dream's about. That's what keeps me up at night. Lena thought about her own nightmares, the ones where her father was alive but slipping away, where she could see him drowning but couldn't reach him in time. She knew that helpless feeling, knew how it could choke you even when you were awake. She's lucky to have you, Lena said quietly. Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in it. A father who's never home, who missed her recital last month because of a board meeting, who brings work on vacation and can't turn off his phone for 5 minutes. A father who's trying. That counts for something. Does it? My dad wasn't perfect either, Lena said. He drank too much after my mom left. Forgot to pay bills sometimes. Let the house fall apart. She paused, looking around the cabin with its peeling paint and drafty windows. But he tried. He stayed. That mattered. I'm sorry about your mother. Don't be. She made her choice. Lena pulled her knees up to her chest. Some people aren't built for this kind of life, the isolation, the cold. She wanted something different. And your father? He wanted her to be happy, so he let her go. Lena smiled sadly, then spent the rest of his life working this land like he could somehow prove she'd made the wrong choice. Did it work? No. But he died trying. They sat with that for a while, two people shaped by loss in different ways, finding unexpected common ground in a cabin while a blizzard tried to bury them both. Morning came gray and muted. The storm had finally blown itself out, leaving behind a world buried in white. Lena woke to find Adrian already up, standing at the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. Think we can get to your car? She asked. He turned. We can try. They bundled up and ventured out into the aftermath. The cold was brutal, the kind that made your lungs ache with every breath. But the wind had died, and visibility was clear for the first time in days. Adrian's SUV was completely buried, just a vague hump in the snow where the road used to be. It took them 2 hours of digging to reach the back hatch, both of them stopping frequently to catch their breath, to warm their hands, to keep working when everything in them wanted to give up. There, Adrian gasped, finally pulling the handle free. The hatch opened, revealing the cargo area mostly dry and intact. Adrian pulled out a locked aluminum case, cradling it like precious cargo. This is it? This is everything. They hauled it back to the cabin, both of them exhausted. Inside, Adrian set the case on the table and worked the combination lock with stiff fingers. The lid popped open, revealing stacks of files, USB drives, printed emails. I need to go through it all, he said. Cross-reference the documents, build a timeline. He stopped mid-sentence, staring at something in the case. His face went pale. What? Lena asked. This is wrong. Adrian pulled out a folder, flipped through it rapidly. These aren't the right files. The surveys, the land codes, they've been replaced. What do you mean replaced? I mean, someone got to these before I left. He grabbed another folder, then another, his movements getting faster, more frantic. The key evidence, it's all gone. What's here is just, it's useless. Lena felt her stomach drop. Are you saying someone in your company knew what you were doing? Had to. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to put his fist through something. They knew I was coming here, knew what I was looking for, and they made sure I wouldn't find it. So that's it? You've got nothing? Not nothing. I still have my own notes, the inconsistencies I documented, but without the hard evidence. He sat down heavily. It's not enough. A good lawyer could argue coincidence, could explain away every single red flag. They stared at the case full of useless papers, both understanding what it meant. No proof, no justice. Nothing but theories and suspicions that wouldn't hold up in any court. Lena felt the old familiar anger rising up, the sense of being cheated by people who had all the power and none of the consequences. Her father had felt this same hopeless rage. There has to be something, she said. Some other way to prove it. Adrian shook his head. Without the original documents... Wait, Lena's mind raced. You said land codes, survey numbers. Yeah. Show me. He pulled out one of the files, spread the papers on the table. Lena leaned over them, scanning the typed text, the official stamps, the numbered codes that supposedly authorized the land transfers. And there, Buried in the bureaucratic language, she saw it. "This is wrong," she said, pointing. "What is?" "The survey code. Section numbers. They're off." Adrian looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because I've been reading land documents since I was 12 years old. My father taught me." She grabbed a pencil, started circling numbers. Wyoming uses a specific system: township, range, section. This code here, it doesn't match the property description, not even close. Could be a typo. Look at this one. And this one. Lena flipped through more pages, finding the same inconsistencies. They're all wrong. Every single transfer has mismatched codes. Adrian stared at the papers, then at her. If the codes are wrong, then the transfers aren't legal. Can't be. The codes have to match exactly, or the deed doesn't hold. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure." Lena met his eyes. "My father fought these same errors. That's what his lawyer found. But by the time they could file a challenge, he'd run out of money." For the first time since opening the case, something like hope crossed Adrian's face. "If we can prove the pattern of false codes, show it wasn't just mistakes, but deliberate fraud, you'd need an expert, someone who could testify." "I'm looking at one." Lena stepped back. "No, I'm not getting involved in this." "You're already involved. You know this system better than anyone I could hire." "I know how to read a survey. That doesn't make me an expert witness. It makes you someone who understands what happened, someone who can explain it in terms a court would accept." Adrian stood, and there was intensity in his eyes now, a focus that reminded Lena this was a man who built empires. "Help me, please. Not for me, for your father, for everyone else who got cheated." Lena wanted to say no, wanted to send him away as soon as the roads cleared and never think about cross-development or land codes or any of it again. But she could hear her father's voice in her head, patient and steady, teaching her how to read those codes when she was barely tall enough to see over his desk. "This is important, Lena girl. Land is everything. You protect it with the right words in the right order." "I'll think about it," she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and from the look on Adrian's face, he knew that was enough. 2/2. They worked through the files for hours, Lena pointing out discrepancies while Adrian took notes in tight, precise handwriting. The cabin grew warm from the fire, and their concentration, the air thick with the smell of old paper and possibility. "Here," Lena said, tapping another document. "Section 14, Range 87 West. But the property description says it's in Range 89. That's miles of difference." Adrian added it to his growing list. "How many does that make?" 17 properties with coding errors, all acquired in the same 2-year period. She sat back, rubbing her eyes. "That's not coincidence." "No." Adrian's jaw was tight. "That's Stephen Marsh getting sloppy because he thought no one was paying attention." "Your friend?" "I thought he was." The words came out bitter. "Turns out I'm not a great judge of character." Lena almost said something cutting, almost reminded him that misjudging people had cost her father everything. But Adrian's face looked hollow in the lamplight, and she found she didn't have the energy for more anger. "People surprise you," she said instead, "usually in the worst ways." "That's dark." "That's experience." Adrian glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. "Is that why you're up here alone? Bad experiences?" "That's none of your business." "Fair enough." He went back to the files, but Lena could tell he was still thinking about it, could feel his curiosity like pressure in the room. The afternoon light was starting to fade when someone knocked on the door. They both froze. Lena couldn't remember the last time anyone had come to the cabin unannounced. Up here, unannounced visits usually meant emergencies. She crossed to the door and pulled it open to find Margaret Chen standing on the porch, bundled in a parka that made her look twice her size. Margaret lived a mile down the mountain, the closest thing Lena had to a neighbor. "Lena, thank God." Margaret pushed inside without waiting for an invitation, stomping snow off her boots. "I've been worried sick. The storm was so bad, and I know you're up here alone." She stopped, noticing Adrian. "Oh. Margaret, this is Adrian. His car went off the road during the storm." "I pulled him out," Lena added, wanting to establish that this wasn't what it looked like. Whatever it looked like. Margaret's eyes went sharp with curiosity, but she just nodded. "Lucky she found you. Roads are completely impassable. Won't be clear for days. So I'm learning, Adrian said. I brought supplies. Margaret held up a canvas bag. Figured you might be running low. Canned goods, batteries, some of that jerky you like even though it tastes like boot leather. Despite everything, Lena smiled. Thanks, Margaret. Also brought something else. Margaret pulled a small wooden box from her coat pocket. Found it when I was cleaning out my attic. It's your father's. He left it with me years ago, said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you. The smile fell from Lena's face. What? I forgot all about it, I'm ashamed to say. It was tucked way back in a corner, but the storm had me thinking about mortality. And, well, here. She pressed the box into Lena's hands. I'm sorry I didn't remember sooner. The box was plain cedar, worn smooth with age. Lena's hands shook as she turned it over, looking for a latch or lock. There was neither, just a simple lid that lifted off. Inside was a letter. I should get going, Margaret said, reading the moment. Storm's supposed to start up again tonight. You two take care. She gave Adrian a meaningful look. Both of you. Then she was gone, leaving tracks in the snow and questions hanging in the air like smoke. Lena stood holding the box, unable to move. The letter sat there, her father's handwriting on the envelope. Just her name. Nothing else. You want privacy? Adrian asked quietly. No. The word surprised her, but it was true. She didn't want to be alone for this. Didn't trust herself not to break, and somehow Adrian's presence felt steadying. Stay. She sat down at the table and opened the envelope with careful fingers. The paper inside was creased, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Her father's handwriting covered both sides. The ink faded but still legible. Lena girl, it started, and her vision blurred immediately. She blinked hard, forcing herself to focus. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And Margaret finally remembered where she put this box. She means well, but her memory's been going for years. Don't be mad at her. Despite the tears, Lena almost laughed. That was her father exactly, worrying about other people even in a letter written from beyond the grave. I need you to know some things. About the land, about cross-development, about what happened. I know you blame them, and I know you blame yourself for not being able to help me fight it. But Lena, honey, it wasn't your fault, and it might not have been theirs either. The words hit like a punch. Lena looked up at Adrian, who was studiously looking away, giving her the illusion of privacy in the too small cabin. I did some digging before things got too bad, the letter continued. Talked to people, asked questions. From what I could tell, the CEO, Adrian Cross, he didn't know what was happening. He lost his wife right around that time. A friend of mine who works in their Denver office said he was barely functioning, just trying to keep it together for his little girl. Lena's throat closed up. She forced herself to keep reading. Someone in that company was dirty. I know that much, but I don't think it was Cross himself. I think he trusted the wrong people, and they took advantage. I tried to reach out to him directly, but his people blocked me every time. By then I was just some angry rancher making noise, and they had lawyers to handle that. The thing is, Lena, I don't want you carrying hate around. It'll eat you alive, and you're too good for that. Your mother left because she couldn't handle the hard things in life, but you're not her. You're strong like your grandfather was. Strong enough to let go of anger when it stopped serving you. If Cross ever does figure out what happened, if he ever tries to make it right, I want you to let him. Not for his sake, but for yours. Because holding on to this will kill you just as surely as it killed me, and I can't stand the thought of that. I love you, Lena girl. I'm sorry I couldn't fight harder. I'm sorry I'm leaving you alone. But you're going to be okay. You're going to be better than okay. The letter was signed simply, Dad, with a little drawing of a mountain underneath that he used to sketch on all her school papers. Lena set it down carefully, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The silence in the cabin was absolute, except for the crackle of the fire and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Lena, Adrian started. He knew. Her voice came out strangled. He knew it wasn't you, and he never told me. He was trying to protect you. By letting me blame an innocent man for 5 years? She looked at Adrian, and the pain in her chest was so sharp she could barely breathe. I hated you. I spent every day hating you, and he knew it was wrong, and he just... The words broke off into a sob she couldn't hold back. Adrian moved without thinking, crossing the space between them and putting a hand on her shoulder. She should have shrugged it off, should have pushed him away, but instead she found herself turning into it, letting him pull her against his chest while she cried for the first time since the funeral. He didn't say anything, didn't offer platitudes or promises, just stood there and let her break, one hand awkward on her back, steady and warm. When the storm finally passed, Lena pulled away, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Sorry. Don't be. I got your shirt wet." "I've had worse problems." Adrian stepped back, giving her space. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Lena picked up the letter again, reading it through tears that wouldn't quite stop. "He was also a stubborn idiot who should have told me this years ago. Maybe he thought you needed the anger to get through it. Or maybe he was just scared I'd go after the truth myself and get hurt." She folded the letter carefully, put it back in the box. "He always did think I was more fragile than I am." "I don't think you're fragile." The words hung between them, meaning more than they should. Lena looked at Adrian, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that made her chest tight for different reasons. "We should keep working," she said, breaking the moment, "while we still have light." They went back to the files, but something had shifted. The anger that had filled the space between them was gone, replaced by something more complicated, something that felt dangerously like understanding. As the sun set and the oil lamps were lit again, Lena found herself talking, really talking, not just answering questions. She told Adrian about her childhood on the mountain, about learning to read survey maps while sitting on her father's lap, about the day her mother left, and how the silence afterward had felt like drowning. Adrian listened, asking occasional questions, offering his own stories in return, about Emma, his daughter, and the terror of raising a kid alone, about his wife Sarah, and how cancer had stolen her so fast he'd barely had time to understand she was dying, about the weight of running a company when all he wanted was to sit on the floor building Lego castles with his daughter. "I missed her 7th birthday," he said quietly. "Had a merger meeting in New York that I couldn't reschedule. Called her on video chat and sang happy birthday while she cried because I wasn't there. You're here now, trying to fix things. Doesn't undo what I missed." "No," Lena agreed, "but it counts for something." Night deepened around them. The promised storm rolled in, gentler this time, just steady snow and wind that sounded almost peaceful. They made dinner together, moving around the small kitchen in a careful dance that felt oddly domestic. "This is strange," Lena said as they ate. "What is?" "This. You being here. It should feel wrong, but it doesn't." Adrian smiled, tired and genuine. "I was thinking the same thing." After dinner, they spread the files out again, and Lena walked Adrian through the survey system with more patience than she'd shown anyone in years. He was a quick study, catching patterns she pointed out, asking smart questions that made her explain things she'd taken for granted. "Your father taught you all this?" he asked at one point. "Starting when I was 12. He said land was language, and if you couldn't read it, someone would take advantage." He was right. Usually was. Lena traced a property line on one of the maps. Even when I wished he wasn't. They worked until the oil lamps started to gutter, both of them yawning, the day's emotion and effort catching up. Lena banked the fire for the night while Adrian made up his bedroll by the hearth. "Lena," he said as she was heading to her room. She turned. "Yeah? Thank you for reading the letter with me here, for not throwing me out after." He paused. "For everything." "You're welcome." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. She lay in bed listening to the wind, thinking about her father's letter, about Adrian sleeping by her fire, about how quickly certainty could turn into doubt and hate, could complicate into something softer. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of her father showing her how to read maps, his patient voice explaining boundaries and markers, teaching her the language of land that would someday help her understand what had been taken, and maybe, just maybe, how to get it back. Morning brought weak sunlight and the realization that they were running low on firewood. Lena stood at the window, calculating how long they could last, when Adrian came up beside her. "We need to talk about next steps," he said. "I know. The roads won't be clear for at least another day, maybe 2. But when they are, I need to get back to Denver, present this evidence to the board." "And me?" "I meant what I said. I need you to testify, to explain the survey errors." He looked at her directly. I know it's asking a lot, but without expert testimony, I'll do it. Adrian blinked. Just like that? My father wanted this made right. You want it made right. And if I'm being honest, Lena took a breath. I want it too. I'm tired of hiding up here, tired of letting anger be the only thing that keeps me warm. It won't be easy. Marcia's lawyers will try to tear you apart. Let them try. There was steel in her voice now, the kind her father would have recognized. I know what I know, and I'm not scared of men in expensive suits anymore. The corner of Adrian's mouth lifted. I believe you. They spent the morning preparing, Adrian walking Lena through what a deposition would look like, what questions she might face. She was sharper than he expected, catching legal loopholes, pointing out weaknesses in their case before opposing counsel could. You should have been a lawyer, he said at one point. My father wanted me to be. I wanted to stay here. Lena shrugged. Choices. Any regrets? She thought about it. Ask me after the trial. Around noon, Lena went to check on the chickens again. The walk to the shed was easier now, a path worn through the snow. The birds were restless, sensing the change in weather, the promise of the storm finally breaking. She was scattering feed when she noticed it. A piece of paper, folded and tucked under the water tray, weathered but protected from the worst of the moisture. Lena pulled it out carefully. More of her father's handwriting, this time just a list. Property codes, survey numbers, names she recognized from the legal battles, and at the bottom, an address in Wyoming. Old supply station, Route 14. Her heart started pounding. She ran back to the cabin, nearly slipping twice in her hurry. Adrian, she burst through the door, breathless. My father, he didn't just suspect fraud, he documented it. Adrian looked up from the files. What? She showed him the paper. This is a list of properties. And this address, I know this place. It's an old supply station about 20 miles from here, been abandoned for years. Why would your father leave you an address to an abandoned building? Because that's where he kept things, important things. Lena was already pulling on her coat. He used to use it as storage when he worked the land. If he hid evidence anywhere, it would be there. Lena, the roads are barely passable, I know, but my truck has chains and four-wheel drive. We can make it. You want to drive 20 miles in winter conditions to check an abandoned building on the chance your father left something there 5 years ago? Lena met his eyes. You drove up a mountain in a blizzard for your evidence. This is mine. Adrian was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's go. The drive was harrowing. Lena's truck groaned and slipped, chains grinding, engine protesting every mile. They passed 2 abandoned cars, saw power lines down, drove through snowdrifts that came up to the bumper. Adrian gripped the door handle so hard his knuckles went white, but he didn't ask her to turn back. The supply station sat alone on a stretch of empty highway, a squat concrete building with boarded windows and a roof that sagged in the middle. The parking lot was buried in snow, no tracks, no signs anyone had been there in years. This is it? Adrian asked. This is it. They waded through snow to the front door. Locked, but Lena had expected that. She pulled a key from her pocket, old and rust-spotted, and worked it into the frozen lock. After several attempts and some creative cursing, it turned. Inside smelled of dust and mouse droppings and years of neglect. The main room was empty except for some broken shelving and scattered papers. But Lena knew where she was going. She headed to the back, to a door marked Storage Authorized Personnel Only. This lock was newer. Her father's doing. She tried the same key, but it didn't fit. Damn, Adrian examined the lock. I could pick it. You know how to pick locks? Emma locked herself in the bathroom when she was 5. I learned fast. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a thin piece of metal. Step back. It took him less than 2 minutes. The lock clicked and the door swung open to reveal a smaller room lined with metal filing cabinets. Lena's breath caught. He really did it. They opened the first cabinet. Files, hundreds of them. Property records, survey maps, photographs of landmarkers, notarized statements from other ranchers who'd been pressured to sell. Everything organized by date, by property, by transaction. This is incredible, Adrian breathed. This is everything we need. Look. Lena pulled out a folder marked Cross-Development, Chain of Evidence. Inside were emails printed and highlighted, correspondence between Stephen Marsh and a land surveyor discussing how to adjust property lines, bank statements showing payments made to county officials, and photographs, dozens of them. Marsh meeting with the surveyor, Marsh at properties that officially showed as vacant but clearly weren't, Marsh with county employees who'd later approved fraudulent transfers. Your father was building a case, Adrian said, a complete case. He ran out of time before he could use it. Lena's voice was thick. And money. The legal fees bled him dry before he could bring all this forward. At the bottom of the cabinet was a video camera, old and bulky. Lena picked it up, turned it over. A tape inside. Think it still works? Adrian asked. Only one way to find out. Back in the main room, they found a dusty television and VCR combo unit. It took several tries to get it running, the tape sticking at first, then finally grinding into motion. The screen flickered to life, and there was her father. Younger, healthier, sitting at a desk in what looked like this very building. My name is Richard Carter, he said to the camera. It's March 15th, 2021. I'm recording this because if things go the way I think they will, I won't be around to see this through. But someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to tell the truth. Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just watched as her father laid out the entire fraud, step by step, naming names, providing evidence, explaining how he'd tracked Marsh's scheme through shell companies and falsified documents. The thing is, her father said near the end, I don't think Adrian Cross knows. I've watched him in interviews, read articles about him. He just lost his wife. He's drowning. And Stephen Marsh took advantage of that. Took advantage of a decent man in the worst moment of his life. The camera moved slightly as her father adjusted it. So if you're watching this, Lena, and I hope to God it's you and not some random scavenger, I need you to understand something. The fight isn't with Cross. It's with the people who used him. Don't waste your anger on the wrong target. He smiled then, sad and tired. I know you, honey. I know you're probably up on that mountain, alone, hating the world. But you can't live like that. Your grandfather did after we lost the first property, and it killed him slow. Don't let it kill you too. The recording ended. The screen went to static. Lena stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Adrian didn't try to comfort her this time, just gave her the space to feel it all. The grief, the validation, the complicated relief of knowing her father had understood, had forgiven, had tried to protect her even in this. We have it, she said finally, her voice raw. We have everything. We do. When do we leave? Adrian checked his watch. Roads should be better by tomorrow morning. We could start back to Denver by midday. Then that's what we do. Lena looked at the filing cabinets, at the evidence her father had spent his last years compiling. We finish what he started. They loaded everything into Lena's truck, working quickly as the afternoon light started to fade. Box after box of files, the videotape handled like the precious artifact it was. By the time they were done, the truck bed was full, and the supply station was empty again, keeping its secrets for the next person who might need them. The drive back was quieter. Lena focused on the road while Adrian went through files, occasionally reading something aloud that made them both angry or vindicated, or both. There's a recording, he said at one point. Audio file on a USB drive. Marsh talking to the surveyor about your father specifically, about how they just needed to wait him out, let the legal fees do their work. Lena's hands tightened on the wheel. Play it. You sure? Play it. The recording was poor quality, but clear enough. Stephen Marsh's voice, casual and cruel, discussing her father like he was a problem to be managed rather than a person whose life they were destroying. Carter's stubborn, Marsh said, but he's also broke. Another few months of motions and he'll have to give up. Then we can move on the property without any complications. What about Cross? The surveyor asked. If he figures out, he won't. Adrian's too busy playing single dad to notice anything. Long as we keep the paperwork clean on the surface, he'll sign whatever we put in front of him. The recording ended. Lena pulled over, had to, her vision blurred with rage. Hey, Adrian said quietly, breathe. They killed him. The words came out choked. Maybe not directly, but they killed him. And they knew. They planned it. I know. And you trusted him. You thought Marsh was your friend. I know that too. Adrian's voice was tight with its own anger. But we have him now. We have everything. He's going to pay for what he did. Lena looked at Adrian, at the fury in his face that matched her own, and felt something click into place. They weren't enemies. Maybe they never really had been. They were two people who'd been hurt by the same man, who'd lost things they couldn't get back, who were now sitting in a truck on a mountain road holding evidence that could finally make things right. When we get to Denver, she said, what happens? I call an emergency board meeting, present the evidence, force Marsh out, and start legal proceedings. Adrian paused. And I make restitution to every family his fraud affected, including yours. I don't want your money. It's not my money. It's what you're owed, what your father was owed. He looked at her steadily. Let me do this, Lena. Let me fix what I should have been paying attention to 5 years ago. She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain that she didn't need anything from him or his company. But that was pride talking, and pride wouldn't pay for fixing the cabin roof or replacing the truck when it finally died, or any of the 100 other things she'd been putting off because she couldn't afford them. Okay, she said. We do this together. Together. They drove back to the cabin as sunset painted the snow gold and pink. Inside, surrounded by boxes of evidence and the weight of what came next, they made dinner and planned their strategy. Adrian would handle the board, the lawyers, the corporate machinery. Lena would testify, would explain the survey codes, would be the human face of what fraud looked like when it destroyed real lives. As night fell and they sat by the fire going through files one more time, Lena realized something had changed. The cabin didn't feel as lonely. The silence wasn't as heavy. And when she looked at Adrian, she didn't see the man who'd destroyed her family anymore. She saw someone who'd been lost like her. Someone who was trying to find his way back to something that mattered. Someone who, against all odds and logic, had become something dangerously close to a friend. Outside, the stars were coming out, bright and cold in the clear winter sky. The storm had finally passed completely. Tomorrow they would leave the mountain, would head to Denver and the fights that waited there. But tonight, they had this. Evidence and purpose, and the strange comfort of not being alone. It would have to be enough. They left at dawn, the truck loaded with evidence and attention that had nothing to do with the icy roads. Lena drove while Adrian made calls on his satellite phone, his voice clipped and professional as he arranged the emergency board meeting, called his lawyers, set machinery in motion that couldn't be stopped once it started. Thursday, he said, ending the last call. 2 days from now. Every board member will be there. That's fast. Has to be. The longer we wait, the more time Marsh has to cover his tracks. Adrian rubbed his face, exhaustion written in every line. He probably already knows something's wrong. I've been off grid for days. He'll be suspicious. Good, Lena said. Let him sweat. The drive to Denver took 8 hours through mountain passes and highways still treacherous from the storm. They stopped once for gas and bad coffee, both of them too wired to eat. Lena watched the landscape change from wilderness to civilization, felt herself getting smaller as the buildings got bigger, as the space she'd lived in for 5 years compressed into traffic and noise, and people who didn't know her name. You okay? Adrian asked as they hit city limits. No. Fair enough. He directed her to a hotel downtown, sleek and expensive in a way that made Lena's truck look like something that should be parked behind it, not in front. A valet actually ran out to meet them, his professional smile faltering when he saw the rust and the dents. I can park it myself, Lena said. Hotel policy, ma'am. Let him, Adrian said quietly. You'll get it back in the same condition. The lobby made Lena want to turn around and drive straight back to Wyoming. Marble floors, chandeliers that probably cost more than her cabin, people in suits that screamed money and power. She was wearing jeans with a hole in the knee and her father's old coat, and every eye that landed on her made quick calculations before dismissing her entirely. Mr. Cross, the manager materialized like he'd been summoned. We weren't expecting you. Your usual suite is fine, and I need a second room, connecting, if possible. The manager's eyes flicked to Lena, and she saw the assumption forming, saw it, and hated it. She's a colleague, Adrian said, his voice sharp enough to cut. Treat her accordingly. Of course, sir. Right away. They rode the elevator in silence. Adrian's phone kept buzzing with messages he ignored. When they reached the 20th floor, he led her down a hallway that probably had better carpet than most people's living rooms. The suite was obscene. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked like art, a bathroom bigger than Lena's entire bedroom. She stood in the middle of it all, feeling like an exhibit in a museum of things she didn't understand. "The connecting room is through there," Adrian said, pointing. "I'll have someone bring up clothes, toiletries, whatever you need." "I don't need—" "Lena." He turned to face her. "The board meeting is formal. You'll need business clothes. Let me handle it." She wanted to fight it, wanted to show up in her jeans and her father's coat and dare anyone to dismiss her. But Adrian was right. This was his world, and she needed to speak its language if she wanted to be heard. "Fine. I need to prep with the lawyers tonight. Go over the evidence, build the presentation." He hesitated. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." "I'm not tired. You drove 8 hours and haven't slept properly in days. Rest." He left before she could argue, disappearing into his own suite and closing the connecting door behind him. Lena stood alone in the expensive silence, feeling more isolated than she ever had on the mountain. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Tried to eat from the room service menu, but everything seemed designed to confuse. Finally, she gave up and went to the window, pressing her forehead against the glass, looking down at the city lights and wondering what the hell she was doing here. A knock on the connecting door made her jump. "It's me!" Adrian called. She opened it to find him standing there with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He looked as wrecked as she felt, tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, exhaustion making him look older than his 32 years. "Thought you might need this," he said. "I thought you were prepping." "I am, but the lawyers are arguing about procedure and it's giving me a headache." He held up the bottle. "Figured we could both use a break." They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the whiskey burning warm down Lena's throat. Good whiskey, the kind that didn't come from a plastic bottle. It made her think of her father, who'd always saved the good stuff for special occasions that never quite materialized. "Tell me about Emma," Lena said suddenly. Adrian looked surprised. "Why?" "Because tomorrow I'm going to stand in front of a room full of strangers and talk about fraud and land codes and my dead father. Tonight I want to hear about something good." He smiled, sad and genuine. "She's 7. Just lost her front teeth and has a lisp she pretends she doesn't have. Wants to be a paleontologist and an astronaut and a princess, possibly all at the same time." "Sounds exhausting." "She is. Best kind of exhausting." Adrian stared into his glass. "She asked me yesterday why I was going to Wyoming. I told her it was for work. She said work always wins and maybe I should just marry it." "Smart kid. Too smart." He took another drink. "I'm trying. That's what kills me. I'm really trying to be there for her, to be present, and it's still not enough." "Maybe it's not about being enough," Lena said. "Maybe it's just about showing up." "Is that what your father did?" "When he could. When the work didn't break him." She set down her glass. "I used to be so angry that he let the fight over the land consume him. Thought he was choosing it over me. But now I wonder if he was fighting for me, for the future he wanted me to have." "You think he'd be proud of what you're doing?" Lena thought about the letter, about the video, about her father's voice telling her not to waste her anger on the wrong target. "I think he'd be surprised I left the mountain. But proud? Maybe. If we win." "We'll win," Adrian said with a certainty she wished she felt. "The evidence is too strong. Even Marcia's lawyers can't explain away falsified survey codes and recorded conversations." "His lawyers will try. Let them." They drank in comfortable silence, the whiskey smoothing the sharp edges of tomorrow. Outside, the city hummed with life that never stopped, never slowed, never cared who got crushed in its gears. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said. "Probably won't stop you. Why did you really save me that first night? You could have left me in the SUV. No one would have known." Lena considered lying, considered giving him some noble answer about doing the right thing, but the whiskey made her honest, because I'm not the kind of person who lets someone die, even if they probably deserve it, because my father raised me better than that. She paused. "Because I'm tired of death winning." "Your mother didn't die, just left, which is its own kind of death, I guess." Lena pulled her knees up to her chest. She called once, about a year after, said she'd found herself in Seattle, started a new life, asked if I wanted to visit. Did you? No. What was the point? She'd made her choice. Staying would have just been salt in the wound. She took another drink. My father never got over it, kept her picture on the mantel until the day he died. I took it down at the funeral. Felt like she'd lost the right to watch over him. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Sarah's picture is in Emma's room. I couldn't bring myself to move it. That's different. Sarah didn't choose to leave. No, but sometimes I wonder if it's healthy, keeping her so present. If Emma would be better off. He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. Say it. If she'd be better off forgetting, moving on, having a life that isn't defined by loss. Is that what you want? Lena asked. To forget? I don't know. Adrian looked at his wedding ring, still on his finger after 4 years. I don't know how to be anything except someone who lost her. It's become part of my identity. Take it away and what's left? A father trying his best. A man fixing his company's mistakes. Someone who drove into a blizzard because doing the right thing mattered more than being safe. Lena met his eyes. That seems like enough to me. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, something vulnerable and raw. For a second, Lena thought he might say something important, something that would change the careful balance they'd maintained. But then his phone buzzed again, shattering the moment. Lawyers, he said, checking the screen. They want me back. Then go. He stood, hesitated at the connecting door. Thank you. For tonight. For all of it. Thank me after we win. The next day was a blur of preparation. A woman showed up with clothes for Lena, laid them out like offerings, explained which combinations were appropriate for what she kept calling the proceedings. Lena picked a dark blue suit because it reminded her least of mourning and let the woman show her how to wear the necklace her father had given her for her 16th birthday without it looking out of place. Adrian's lawyers descended mid-morning, 3 sharks in expensive suits who treated Lena like a witness to be managed rather than a person. They drilled her on the survey codes, on her qualifications, on every detail of her father's case until she wanted to scream. They're going to try to rattle you, the lead lawyer said, a woman named Patricia with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. They'll imply you're biased, emotional, unqualified. Your job is to stay calm and stick to the facts. I know the facts. Knowing them and presenting them under hostile cross-examination are different things. Patricia's voice was clipped. I've seen expert witnesses with decades of experience fall apart on the stand. You're a civilian with a personal stake in this. They're going to go for blood. Let them try. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe you'll surprise me. The rest of the day was spent reviewing documents, practicing responses, running through worst-case scenarios until Lena's head pounded. Adrian appeared occasionally, checking on her progress, offering encouragement that felt increasingly hollow as the hours dragged on. By evening, Lena was ready to break. She stood at the window of her suite, watching the sun set behind buildings that blocked out the sky, and felt panic rising in her throat. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. Tomorrow she was going to stand in front of a boardroom full of executives and lawyers and try to convince them that her father's death mattered, that fraud had consequences, that survey codes and property lines were worth fighting for. And they were going to tear her apart. The connecting door opened. Adrian walked in without knocking, took one look at her face and said, "We're getting out of here." What? Come on. He drove them out of the city in a rental car, heading west toward the mountains visible in the distance. They didn't talk, just drove until the buildings gave way to suburbs, and the suburbs gave way to open land that reminded Lena why she'd stayed in Wyoming all these years. Adrian pulled off at a trailhead, empty in the February cold. They got out and walked, their breath fogging in the air, boots crunching on frozen ground. Better? He asked after a while. Yeah. Lena took a deep breath, felt her chest loosen. How'd you know? Because I saw your face and recognized it. That's how I looked right before my first major presentation. Sarah drove me to a park and made me walk until I remembered how to breathe. Did it work? Presentation went fine. Still married her. They walked in silence, following a trail that wound up a small hill. At the top, They could see Denver sprawled out below, lights beginning to flicker on as darkness fell. "I'm scared," Lena said quietly. "I know." "What if I freeze up? What if I can't explain it right and they dismiss the evidence?" "Then we find another way," Adrian said. "But you're not going to freeze up. You're the woman who dragged a 200-pound man through a blizzard. You can handle a boardroom." "That was different." "How?" "Because you were dying, and there wasn't time to think. Tomorrow, there'll be all the time in the world to think, to second guess, to—" "Lena." Adrian caught her arm, turned her to face him. "You know this material better than anyone in that room. You've lived it. That counts for something." "In your world, I don't think it does." "Then make them understand. Make them see what I see." His grip tightened. "You're not just some angry daughter looking for revenge. You're the expert who caught fraud that everyone else missed. Own that." She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty he seemed to have, but all she felt was small and out of her depth and terrified of failing her father one more time. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered. Adrian didn't answer right away, just looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen their own share of failure and loss. "Then it's not enough," he said finally. "But at least we tried. At least we stood up and said this matters. Sometimes that's all you can do." They stood on the hill as darkness fell completely, looking down at the city where tomorrow everything would change one way or another. The cold bit through Lena's jacket, but she didn't move. Didn't want to go back yet to the hotel and the lawyers and the careful choreography of corporate justice. "I should call Emma," Adrian said eventually. "Tell her good night." "Yeah, we should go." But neither of them moved, both reluctant to break whatever fragile peace they'd found on this anonymous hillside. Finally, Adrian's phone rang, Patricia's name flashing on the screen, and reality reasserted itself. The drive back was quiet. Adrian dropped her at the hotel entrance and went to park, and Lena rode the elevator alone, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing down like the mountain snow she'd left behind. In her room, she laid out the suit, checked the necklace clasp 3 times, reviewed her notes until the words blurred. Sleep seemed impossible, but somehow it came, dragging her under into dreams where she stood in front of a boardroom that stretched into infinity, trying to explain survey codes to people who had her father's face. She woke to pale morning light and the sound of her own racing heart. Today. The shower helped, the coffee helped more. By the time Adrian knocked on the connecting door, Lena had achieved something like calm, fragile, but holding. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Me neither." Cross Development Corporation headquarters occupied 40 floors of steel and glass in downtown Denver. Lena felt sick walking through the lobby, seeing the company name in letters taller than she was, knowing her father had died fighting this place, and she was about to walk into its heart. The boardroom was on the 38th floor. Patricia met them at the elevator, her expression grim. "Marsh brought his own team," she said. 4 lawyers. "They're arguing this is a personnel matter that doesn't require board involvement." "Too bad," Adrian said. "I'm still the CEO. This meeting is happening." They walked down a hallway that seemed designed to intimidate, past offices where people pretended not to stare. The boardroom doors were already open, voices drifting out, tense and argumentative. Lena's hands were shaking. She curled them into fists and followed Adrian inside. The room was exactly what she'd feared. Long table, leather chairs, wall-to-wall windows showing the city below. 12 board members were already seated, men and women in expensive suits who stopped talking when Adrian entered. At the far end of the table sat Stephen Marsh, flanked by lawyers who looked ready for war. "Adrian." Marsh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is dramatic, even for you. Couldn't this wait until the regular quarterly meeting?" "No," Adrian said. "It couldn't." He took his seat at the head of the table. Lena was directed to a chair along the wall, not at the table itself, marked as observer rather than participant. Patricia sat next to her, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone even if she felt it. "I've called this meeting," Adrian began, "because evidence has come to light regarding fraudulent land acquisitions conducted by this company over the past 5 years, evidence that implicates senior leadership in systematic fraud." Marsh leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxed confidence. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof." "I do." What followed was methodical and brutal. Adrian presented the evidence piece by piece: the falsified survey codes, the email trails, the bank statement showing payments to county officials, the photographs of Marsh meeting with the surveyor. Each revelation landed like a physical blow, the board members' expressions shifting from skepticism to concern to barely concealed fury. Through it all, Marsh sat calm, his lawyers whispering in his ears, his face betraying nothing. When Adrian finished, the chairman of the board spoke. "These are serious allegations. Mr. Marsh, do you have a response?" "I do." Marsh stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate care. "This is a vendetta disguised as evidence. Adrian's been under tremendous stress since losing his wife. He's looking for someone to blame for problems that don't exist. The documents are taken out of context. Survey codes get corrected all the time. Payments to officials are standard consulting fees. Everything Adrian just showed you has a legitimate explanation." "What about the recordings?" one of the board members asked. Marsh didn't even blink. "Edited, fabricated. Modern technology makes it easy to create convincing fakes." He looked directly at Adrian. "I understand you're hurting. I understand you want to find meaning in Sarah's death by being some kind of crusader. But destroying this company won't bring her back." The room went very quiet. Adrian's face had gone white, his hands gripping the table edge so hard Lena could see his knuckles from across the room. "Don't," Adrian said, his voice deadly soft. "Don't you dare bring her into this." "Why not? This is about her, isn't it? About the guilt you feel for not being there when she needed you? So now you're here, being the hero for strangers, trying to make up for—" Adrian lunged across the table. It took 3 people to pull him back. Patricia and 2 board members restraining him while Marsh stood untouched, that same cold smile on his face. "Gentlemen, please," the chairman shouted. "This is a boardroom, not a boxing ring." "He's a liar," Adrian said, breathing hard. "Everything I showed you is real. The fraud is real. People lost everything because of him." "People like who?" Marsh asked. "Show me victims. Show me people who've actually been harmed by these alleged crimes." "Richard Carter," Adrian said. "Lena Carter's father. He lost his land because of your fraud. It killed him." Every eye in the room turned to Lena. Her mouth went dry. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She wasn't supposed to be part of the presentation yet. Wasn't ready. Hadn't— "Ms. Carter," the chairman said, "would you like to address the board?" Lena stood on legs that barely supported her, walked to the front of the room feeling like she was moving through water. Patricia tried to hand her notes, but Lena's hands were shaking too badly to hold them. She looked at the board members, at Marsh's lawyers, at Adrian, who was still being held back but whose eyes were on her, believing in her even when she didn't believe in herself. "My name is Lena Carter," she began, and her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "My father was Richard Carter. He owned land in Montana Valley, Wyoming. 5 years ago, Cross Development acquired that land through fraud." "Alleged fraud," one of Marsh's lawyers interjected. "No." The word came out stronger than Lena expected. "Actual fraud. I can prove it." "You're not an expert witness," the lawyer continued. "You're an emotional daughter with an axe to grind." "I'm the daughter who learned land survey codes from her father starting when she was 12 years old. I'm the person who can read a property description and tell you in 30 seconds if the survey numbers match. I'm the one who caught errors in your documents that your own legal team missed." She moved to the screen where Adrian's presentation was still displayed, pulled up the first fraudulent transfer. "This property, Section 14, Range 87 West, Township 23 North. That's what the survey code says. But the property description puts it in Range 89 West. That's not a typo. That's a difference of 12 miles. Her hands steadied as she fell into familiar territory. Wyoming's land system is based on the Public Land Survey System. Every piece of property has unique identifiers that have to match exactly. When they don't, the transfer isn't valid. "Coding errors happen," the lawyer said. "Not 17 times in 2 years, not all benefiting the same company, not all processed by the same county official who was receiving payments from Mr. Marsh's shell companies." She pulled up another document, then another, walking the board through each fraudulent transfer with growing confidence. The survey codes she knew by heart, the property descriptions her father had made her memorize, the systematic pattern of fraud that emerged when you knew what to look for. Marcia's lawyers tried to interrupt, tried to discredit her, but Lena didn't stop, didn't let them derail her. She spoke in the language of land and law and numbers that didn't lie, and she watched the board members' faces change as understanding dawned. My father spent his last years fighting this, she said finally. He died of a heart attack brought on by the stress of losing everything he'd built. But before he died, he documented everything, the fraud, the pattern, the people responsible. She looked directly at Marsh. He knew it was you, and now everyone else knows too. The room erupted. Board members shouting questions, lawyers objecting, the chairman demanding order. Through it all, Marsh sat silent, his confidence finally cracking, showing the calculating predator underneath. I move, one of the board members said loudly, that we suspend Mr. Marsh pending a full investigation. Seconded, said another. The vote was swift and unanimous. Marsh's lawyers protested, threatened lawsuits, threw every legal term they could think of, but it was over. The board had seen the truth, and there was no talking their way out of it. Security was called. Marsh was escorted from the building, his face a mask of rage barely contained. As he passed Lena, he leaned in close. You think you've won? He whispered. You've just painted a target on your back. I have friends, connections. This isn't over. Yes, Lena said quietly. It is. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. The board voted to conduct a full audit of all land acquisitions, to bring in external investigators, to contact every family affected by the fraudulent transfers and begin restitution proceedings. Adrian stood and made one final statement. I take full responsibility for not catching this sooner, for trusting the wrong people, for being so buried in personal grief that I failed to see what was happening in my own company. His voice was steady but heavy with regret. Effective immediately, I'm implementing new oversight procedures. Every land acquisition will be reviewed by an independent board. Every transfer will be verified by multiple experts. And every family affected by Stephen Marsh's fraud will receive full compensation, regardless of legal liability. He looked at Lena. Starting with the Carter family. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out, some stopping to shake Adrian's hand, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Patricia was already on her phone, coordinating with prosecutors, beginning the legal machinery that would ensure Marsh faced criminal charges. When the room finally emptied, it was just Lena and Adrian, standing in the space where everything had changed. You did it, Adrian said. We did it. No, he shook his head. That was all you. The moment you started explaining the survey codes, I've never seen anything like that. You made them understand. Lena felt exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. I need to sit down. They sat in the empty boardroom as the city hummed below, both of them too drained to move. Lena's hands were still shaking, adrenaline slowly fading into something like shock. What happens now? She asked. Criminal investigation. Marsh will be arrested. There will be a trial, probably multiple trials. You'll need to testify again. Great. But the hard part's over. You stood up in that room and you didn't back down. Everything else is just procedure. Lena looked at the table where Marsh had sat, where he'd tried to use Adrian's grief as a weapon, where his certainty had crumbled in the face of truth. He threatened me, she said. When security was taking him out, said I'd painted a target on my back. Adrian's expression went dark. I'll handle it. How? By making sure he understands that going after you means going through me, and my lawyers, and every resource I have. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on, let's get out of here. They left Cross Development headquarters and didn't look back. Outside, the February sun was shining, cold and bright, making the snow on distant mountains gleam like promises of something clean and untouched. Adrian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and smiled, the first genuine smile Lena had seen since they'd entered the boardroom. Emma, he said, I have to take this. Take it. She watched him walk a few steps away, watched his whole body language change as he talked to his daughter, the corporate armor dropping away to reveal just a father who missed his kid. Lena stood on the sidewalk and breathed deep, tasting city air that wasn't quite as oppressive as it had been. She'd done it, actually done it. Stood in front of people who wanted to dismiss her and made them listen, made them understand, made them care. Her father would have been proud, The thought made her chest tight, but it was good tight this time. The kind that came from knowing you'd honored someone's memory in a way that mattered. Adrian came back, still smiling. Emma wants to know if I'm coming home tonight. Are you? Yeah, I am. He looked at Lena. What about you? Where's home for you now? It was a good question. The cabin waited, cold and empty, up on a mountain that suddenly seemed very far away. But Denver felt wrong, too. All noise and concrete and people who didn't know the language of land and sky. I don't know, Lena admitted. Haven't thought that far ahead. Well, Adrian hesitated. You have a standing invitation. To visit, I mean. Meet Emma. She'd like you. How do you know? Because you're real. Emma's good at spotting real. He paused. And because I'd like you to. Visit, that is, when things settle down. There was something in his voice, something careful and hopeful that made Lena's heart do complicated things. But before she could figure out how to respond, Patricia appeared with a stack of documents that needed signing, and the moment passed. Later, after the paperwork and the statements and the endless logistics of dismantling fraud, Lena found herself back in the hotel suite, still in her business clothes, still not quite believing the day had actually happened. A knock on the connecting door. Come in. Adrian entered carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of the same whiskey from before. Figured we earned this. They drank on the balcony, watching the city light up as night fell. The whiskey burned less this time, or maybe Lena was just getting used to it. Thank you, Adrian said after a while, for everything, for saving my life, for believing me about the investigation, for standing up in that boardroom when Marsh tried to tear you apart. You would have done the same. I don't know. Before all this, before you, I'm not sure I would have. He stared into his glass. I've been sleepwalking for 4 years, going through the motions, telling myself I was living when really I was just surviving. And now? Now I'm awake, and it hurts, but it's better than being numb. Lena understood that. Understood waking up and having to feel everything you'd been avoiding. It was why she'd stayed on the mountain so long, keeping the world at arm's length where it couldn't hurt her. What will you do? Adrian asked. After this? Go home, I guess. Fix the cabin roof before the next storm. Check on the chickens. Live my life. Alone? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to name. That's what I'm good at, Lena said finally. Doesn't mean it's what you want. What I want doesn't matter much. World doesn't care what we want. Maybe not. Adrian set down his glass and turned to face her fully. But I care. What you want matters to me. The words landed hard, honest in a way that made Lena's carefully maintained walls crack just a little. She looked at Adrian and saw someone who'd lost as much as she had, who'd been as broken, who'd somehow found his way back to something like hope. And she wanted to be brave, wanted to reach across the space between them and take the risk of letting someone close enough to hurt her again. But years of isolation had taught her caution, and the words wouldn't come. I should get some sleep, she said instead, hating herself for the cowardice. Long drive back tomorrow. Something flickered across Adrian's face. Disappointment maybe, or understanding, or both. But he just nodded and stood. Good night, Lena. Good night. She watched him go, watched the connecting door close, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But the cabin was waiting, the mountain was waiting, and the safe, lonely life she'd built was still there, ready to fold around her like familiar armor. Wasn't it? Lena woke before dawn to the sound of her phone ringing. Not her old flip phone that barely worked on the mountain, but the new smartphone Adrian's assistant had given her so the lawyers could reach her. She'd forgotten to turn it off. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. It's 6 a.m, Lena said instead of hello. Marsh was arrested an hour ago. FBI showed up at his house with a warrant. Thought you'd want to know. Lena sat up, suddenly wide awake. That was fast. Federal fraud case. They don't mess around. Patricia's voice carried satisfaction. He's being held without bail. Flight risk, they said. Apparently he had a packed bag and a ticket to the Caymans in his car. So it's really over. The arrest is. The trial will take months, maybe longer, but yes, the part where he can hurt anyone else is over. They talked for a few more minutes about depositions and testimony schedules, but Lena barely heard it. Her mind was stuck on the image of Stephen Marsh in handcuffs, his carefully constructed world collapsing the way her father's had. Except this time, it was deserved. After hanging up, she couldn't get back to sleep. She showered, dressed in her own clothes that felt strange after a day in business attire, and stood at the window watching Denver wake up. The city looked different in early morning light, less hostile somehow, just a place where people lived and worked and tried to get by. The connecting door opened without a knock. Adrian stood there in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair sticking up, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "Heard your phone," he said. "Everything okay?" "Marsh was arrested." "I know. Patricia called me too." He leaned against the doorframe. "Couldn't sleep after." "Me neither." They stood in awkward silence, the unfinished conversation from last night hanging between them like fog. Finally, Adrian spoke. "I meant what I said, about wanting you to visit, meet Emma. I wasn't just being polite." "I know. But you're going back to the mountain." It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. "That's where I live." "Is it where you want to live?" "I don't know what I want anymore," Lena admitted. "A week ago, I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. Now everything's different, and I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Whatever this is." She gestured between them, helpless. "I don't know how to let people in. Don't know how to trust that they'll stay." "I'm not asking you to trust anything except that I mean what I say." Adrian took a step into the room. "Come visit. Just for a weekend. See if maybe you like it outside the cabin. If you don't, you can go back and I'll never bother you again. And if I do like it, then we figure it out from there." It was such a simple offer, so reasonable, but it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Saying yes meant admitting the isolation she'd wrapped around herself like armor was really just a prison. Meant risking the pain she'd spent 5 years avoiding. But the cabin would still be there. The mountain would wait. And maybe, just maybe, there was something worth the risk. "Okay," Lena heard herself say. "One weekend." The smile that broke across Adrian's face made her chest hurt in the best way. She left Denver that morning, driving back through mountains that felt less like barriers and more like old friends saying goodbye. The truck handled better on the clear roads, and Lena made good time, her mind wandering through everything that had happened since that night she'd pulled a stranger from the snow. Margaret was waiting at the cabin when Lena arrived, having checked on the chickens in her absence. She took one look at Lena's face and smiled. "Well?" she asked. "Well, what? Did you burn down his company? Send him to prison? Get your revenge?" "Something like that." Lena carried her bag inside, breathing in the familiar smell of wood smoke and old memories. "The man who did the fraud got arrested. Adrian's making restitution to everyone affected." "Including you?" "Including me." Margaret studied her with eyes that missed nothing. "And the handsome CEO who crashed on your mountain? Where's he fit in all this?" "He's in Denver with his daughter, where he belongs." "Uh-huh." Margaret's tone said she didn't believe a word. "And you came back here alone because you like being alone, not because you're scared." "I'm not scared." "Lena, honey, I've known you since you were born. You're terrified." Margaret sat down at the kitchen table, uninvited. "Your mama left, your daddy died, and you've spent 5 years convincing yourself that alone is better than taking another chance at getting hurt. But that's not living. That's just waiting to die." The words hit hard because they were true. Lena set down her bag and slumped into the other chair. "What if I'm not built for anything else?" she asked quietly. "What if this is all I know how to do?" "Then you learned something new. You think your daddy knew how to be a single parent when your mama walked out? He figured it out because he had to, because you were worth figuring it out for." Margaret reached across and squeezed Lena's hand. "Maybe it's time you figured out what you're worth." After Margaret left, Lena walked through the cabin, touching familiar things. Her father's coat, the stove he'd cooked on, the table where he'd taught her survey codes and land law and how to see through lies to the truth underneath. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, waiting for her to slip back into the comfortable pattern of isolation. But it felt different now, smaller, like she'd outgrown it without realizing. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. The restitution check arrived, more money than Lena had seen in her entire life. Patricia called regularly with updates on the case against Marsh. The county started reviewing every land transfer he'd touched, finding fraud after fraud, victims by the dozens who'd lost property and never understood why. And Adrian called. Not every day, but often enough that Lena started looking forward to the sound of his voice on the phone. He told her about Emma's school play, about board meetings where they were rebuilding trust, about the investigation that kept uncovering new layers of Marsh's corruption. She told him about fixing the cabin roof, about Margaret's gossip, about the chickens who'd survived the winter and were starting to lay again. They didn't talk about the offer to visit, didn't push, just existed in each other's lives in this careful, tentative way that felt both safe and insufficient. March came with early spring, snow melting to mud, the mountain coming alive after winter's death grip. Lena stood on her porch one morning and realized she was bored. Actually bored. The cabin didn't need her constant attention anymore. The chickens were fine. The solitude she'd craved for 5 years felt empty instead of peaceful. She called Adrian before she could talk herself out of it. "I want to take you up on that offer," she said when he answered. "Which offer?" "To visit, to meet Emma, if it's still open." The pause on the other end lasted just long enough to make Lena's stomach drop. Then Adrian said, "When can you get here?" She drove to Denver 2 days later, her truck packed with enough clothes for a weekend and enough anxiety for a lifetime. The city felt less hostile this time, more like a challenge she might actually be able to meet. Adrian had given her his home address, a house in a suburb she'd never heard of, and her GPS led her through tree-lined streets that looked nothing like the mountain but had their own kind of beauty. The house was smaller than she'd expected for a CEO, just a 2-story colonial with a yard that needed mowing and a basketball hoop over the garage. Normal, human-scaled. Adrian opened the door before she could knock, and the smile on his face made the whole terrifying drive worth it. "You came," he said. "I came." Emma's inside. Fair warning, she's been vibrating with excitement since I told her we had a visitor. "You told her about me?" "Told her you're a friend who saved my life. She's been planning your entire visit." He stepped aside to let Lena in. "I'm sorry in advance for whatever chaos you're about to experience." The chaos arrived in the form of a 7-year-old with missing front teeth and her father's dark eyes, who skidded into the hallway in socks and immediately started talking. "Are you Lena? Dad said you live on a mountain and you have chickens, and you pulled him out of a car in a blizzard like a superhero, except real. Can I see the mountain sometime? Do your chickens have names? Dad says I can't get chickens because we don't have room, but we have a whole yard, so I think he's just making excuses. Do you like pizza? We're having pizza for dinner because I picked and Dad said you wouldn't mind. Are you going to marry my dad?" "Emma." Adrian's voice was strained. "Breathe." "I'm breathing. I'm also asking questions. Ms. Patterson says questions show intellectual curiosity." Lena couldn't help it. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Yes, I'm Lena. The mountain's in Wyoming. The chickens don't have names because I'm bad at naming things. I love pizza, and your dad's right about needing more space for chickens. But are you—" "Emma," Adrian said more firmly. "Go set the table, please." Emma made a face but darted off, leaving Lena and Adrian in the hallway. He looked mortified. "I'm so sorry. She has no filter. I've tried, but—" "She's great," Lena said honestly. "She's exactly what a 7-year-old should be. A nightmare? Alive." Something in Adrian's expression softened. He showed Lena to the guest room, gave her time to settle, and then they had dinner around a table that had clearly seen a lot of family meals. Emma dominated the conversation, asking 1,000 questions and barely waiting for answers before launching into stories about school and friends, and a boy named Marcus who ate paste and was definitely not her boyfriend, no matter what anyone said. Watching Adrian with his daughter was its own revelation. He was patient and present in a way Lena hadn't expected, helping with homework after dinner, negotiating bedtime with the skill of someone who'd fought this battle many times, reading a chapter from a book about dragons that Emma had clearly heard 100 times but still loved. When he came back downstairs, Lena was in the living room, looking at photos on the mantel. Most were of Emma at various ages, gap-toothed and grinning, but there was one of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a baby who had to be Emma. "That's Sarah," Adrian said quietly, coming to stand next to her. She's beautiful. She was. He picked up the photo, ran his thumb over the glass. Emma asks about her sometimes. Wants to know what she was like, if she would have been proud. I try to tell her, but how do you explain someone to a kid who barely remembers them? You tell her the truth. That's what my father did. Lena looked at the photo again. He used to tell me my mother was beautiful and charming and not strong enough for the life she chose. Said it wasn't her fault she couldn't be what we needed, but it was her choice to leave. Made me understand I could miss her without excusing what she did. Did it help? Eventually. Once I stopped being angry. She paused. Sarah didn't choose to leave. No, but I chose to bury myself in work afterward. Chose to let people like Marsh take advantage because paying attention was too painful. Adrian set the photo back down carefully. Emma deserved better. She got you. That's not nothing. They moved to the couch, and Adrian opened a bottle of wine that was probably expensive, but Lena wouldn't have known the difference. They talked about this case. Marsh's lawyer was trying to get charges reduced, but the evidence was too strong, and about the land trust Adrian was setting up to protect properties in Wyoming from future fraud. I want to hire someone to run it, he said, someone who understands land law and survey codes, someone who actually cares about protecting people instead of profits. Sounds like a unicorn. Sounds like you. Lena nearly choked on her wine. What? The position. I want to offer it to you. Adrian set down his glass. I know it's crazy. I know you have the cabin and your life and no reason to trust that this isn't just another corporate scheme. But you're the best person for this. You proved that in the boardroom. I proved I can read survey codes. You proved you can see through bullshit and you care enough to fight for what's right. That's what this needs. He leaned forward. Think about it. You'd have an office, a salary, actual resources to protect land instead of just watching it get stolen. You could make a real difference. In Denver. In Wyoming, actually. The office would be in Casper, central location, close to the county records, easier access to the properties we'd be protecting. Lena's mind raced. A real job, a purpose beyond just surviving. The chance to do what her father had tried to do, but with backing and support and the weight of Cross Development's resources behind her. But it meant leaving the cabin, leaving the isolation she'd built her life around. I need time, she said, to think about it. Take all the time you need. That night, Lena lay in the guest room listening to the sounds of a house with people in it. Emma singing in her sleep down the hall. Adrian moving around in the kitchen. The creak of old floors and the hum of heat through vents. Sounds of life happening, of the world turning, of things mattering beyond just her own survival. In the morning, Emma dragged her outside to play basketball, which Lena was terrible at, but Emma found hilarious. They made pancakes for breakfast, Emma insisting on helping and getting flour everywhere. Adrian rolled his eyes, but he was smiling, and Lena caught herself thinking, this is what happy looks like. The weekend passed too quickly. Sunday evening came with the reality that Lena needed to drive back, needed to return to the cabin and the decision waiting for her there. Emma threw her arms around Lena's waist and made her promise to visit again soon. You're my second favorite person now, Emma announced. After Dad and my friend Zoe, but before Marcus, who eats paste. That's quite an honor, Lena said seriously. Will you come back? Yeah, I will. Adrian walked her to the truck, both of them moving slow, stretching out the goodbye. Thank you for coming, he said. For giving this a chance. Thank you for asking me to. The job offer stands, whenever you're ready to answer. Lena looked at the house, at the light in Emma's window, at Adrian standing close enough to touch, but still maintaining that careful distance they'd established. What are we doing? She asked quietly. What do you mean? This, us. The job offer and the visits and the phone calls. What are we actually doing? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. What do you want us to be doing? I don't know either. That's the problem. Maybe... He stopped, started again. Maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just keep doing what we're doing and see where it goes. That's terrifying. Yeah, it is. He smiled, small and uncertain. But it's better than being alone. Lena drove back to Wyoming with those words echoing in her head. The cabin waited, exactly as she'd left it, But when she walked inside, it felt different. Too quiet. Too empty. Too much like a shell of a life instead of an actual life. She stood in her father's coat, looking at the table where he'd taught her everything that had led to this moment, and made a decision. The phone call to Adrian the next morning was short. "I'll take the job," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "I keep the cabin. Use it on weekends, holidays, whenever I need to remember where I came from." "Done. And I want to be involved in hiring. Make sure we're getting people who actually care, not just collecting a paycheck. I wouldn't have it any other way. And," Lena took a breath, "I want to see where this goes. With us. No promises, no pressure, just seeing." The silence on the other end stretched so long, Lena thought the call had dropped. Then Adrian's voice came through, warm and a little rough. "I'd like that too." Moving to Casper took 2 months of logistics and paperwork and saying goodbye to a mountain that had been her whole world. Margaret cried, made Lena promise to visit, and gave her a housewarming gift that turned out to be a photo of Lena's father in a new frame. "So he can watch over you in the new place too," Margaret said. The job was harder than Lena expected and more fulfilling than she'd imagined. She hired a small team of people who understood land the way she did, who'd been hurt by fraud or seen their communities destroyed by corporate greed. Together they built something that actually protected people instead of exploiting them. Adrian visited when he could, bringing Emma, who insisted on naming all the office plants and drew pictures of chickens that Lena hung on her walls. Lena drove to Denver some weekends, falling into the rhythm of Emma's life, becoming someone the kid actually looked forward to seeing. And slowly, carefully, she and Adrian figured out what they were doing. It wasn't smooth. They argued about business decisions and parenting philosophies, and whether Lena's insistence on doing everything herself was strength or stubbornness. They stumbled through the awkwardness of dating while living in different cities, of introducing the possibility of a relationship to a 7-year-old who had opinions about everything, of learning to trust each other with the broken parts they'd both been hiding. But they kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing each other even when it would have been easier to walk away. Spring turned to summer. The trial against Marsh dragged on, but the outcome was never in doubt. He was convicted on 14 counts of fraud and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The families he'd hurt got their restitution. The land trust protected dozens of properties from similar schemes. Justice, it turned out, was possible. Not perfect, not complete, but real enough to matter. On a clear day in August, Adrian drove to Casper unannounced and asked Lena if she wanted to take a drive. They ended up at her cabin, which she'd been maintaining but hadn't stayed at in months. The chickens were gone. Margaret had taken them, but the building still stood, weathered and worn and waiting. "I have something for you," Adrian said as they stood on the porch. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was Lena's necklace, the one her father had given her, except it had been repaired. The clasp that had broken years ago was fixed, the chain reinforced, the whole thing polished to a shine it hadn't had in decades. "How did you—" "You left it at my house months ago. I had a jeweler fix it." Adrian pulled it from the box. "Your father gave this to you, right?" "For my 16th birthday. Clasp broke a year later and I never got around to fixing it." He had good taste. Adrian moved behind her, fastening the necklace around her throat. His fingers were warm against her skin. "There's something else you should know about your father." "What?" "He helped me once. Years ago, before the fraud, before everything. I was at a gas station in Wyoming trying to figure out how to change Emma's diaper in a public restroom because I was new at the single dad thing and completely lost. Your father saw me struggling and stepped in, showed me how to do it, talked to me about raising kids alone, gave me this whole speech about how the hard days make you appreciate the good ones." Lena turned to look at him, eyes stinging. "He never told me that. I didn't even know his name, just that he was kind when I needed it and didn't ask for anything in return. When I saw his name on the fraud case, I remembered. Couldn't place it at first, but then I saw a photo and I knew. The man whose land my company stole had once helped me change my daughter's diaper in a gas station bathroom. That's why you investigated. That's why I cared enough to look closer when the numbers didn't add up. Your father showed me kindness I didn't deserve from a stranger. I owed him the truth, even if it came too late to matter for him." Lena touched the necklace, feeling the weight of it against her skin. The weight of her father's legacy and Adrian's guilt and the strange path that had brought them both here. It matters now, she said. That has to count for something. Does it? Yeah, it does. Adrian took her hand and they stood on the porch looking at mountains that had witnessed everything. The storm that brought them together. The fraud that should have driven them apart. The slow, difficult work of building something neither of them had expected. Emma asked me last night if you were going to be her new mom, Adrian said quietly. Lena's heart stopped. What did you tell her? That I didn't know. That it wasn't something we talked about. That relationships were complicated and she shouldn't get her hopes up. He turned to face her. But the truth is my hopes are already up. Have been for months. And I don't know how to not hope for this anymore. Adrian, I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's not what you want. But I need you to know that when I think about my future, you're in it. You and Emma and the life we could build if you're willing to take that chance. Lena looked at him. This man who'd lost as much as she had and somehow found his way back to hoping anyway. Who'd driven into a blizzard to do the right thing. Who'd believed her when she had every reason to hate him. Who'd become the person she called when something good happened or something bad happened. Or when nothing happened at all, and she just wanted to hear his voice. She thought about her father's letter, about his belief that Adrian was a good man worth forgiving, about the life she'd built in isolation and the life she was building now, messy and complicated and full of people who could hurt her if she let them. And she thought about the alternative, about going back to the cabin alone, about walls built so high nothing could get in or out, about the slow death of never risking enough to live. I'm terrified, she said honestly. Me too. I don't know how to do this, how to be part of someone's life like this. We'll figure it out together, like we've been figuring everything else out. What if I'm too broken? What if I can't? Lena. Adrian cupped her face in his hands. We're all broken. The question is whether we're broken in ways that fit together or ways that tear each other apart. And I really think we might fit. She kissed him then, there on the porch of her father's cabin with the mountains watching and the future uncertain and her heart hammering with terror and hope in equal measure. He kissed her back like he'd been waiting for permission, like this was the answer to a question he'd been too afraid to ask. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lena rested her forehead against his. One step at a time, she said. One step at a time, he agreed. They stayed at the cabin that night, building a fire and talking until the stars came out. Adrian told her about the conversation with Emma, about how his daughter had already started planning a wedding with chickens as bridesmaids. Lena told him about Margaret's knowing looks and the way she'd started knitting something that looked suspiciously like a baby blanket. Getting ahead of themselves, Lena said. Little bit. We've only been actually dating for, 4 months? 4 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. You're counting. Emma has a calendar. She's very invested in this relationship. They laughed and it felt good, felt right. Felt like maybe the broken pieces of their lives could fit together into something new. Fall came with the changing of leaves and Emma starting 2nd grade and Lena's land trust protecting its 50th property from predatory acquisition. Winter followed, gentler than the one before, and Lena split her time between Casper and Denver and weekends at the cabin that was slowly becoming just a place she visited instead of the whole of her world. Adrian proposed in March, exactly 1 year after she'd first agreed to visit. Not with grand gestures or expensive restaurants, just the two of them, and Emma building a snowman in the backyard, and his quiet question of whether she'd be willing to make this official. Lena said yes with snow in her hair, and Emma shrieking with joy and her heart full of the kind of hope she'd thought was dead. The wedding was small, held at the cabin in late spring when the mountain was green and alive. Margaret cried through the whole ceremony. Emma served as flower girl and took her job very seriously. Patricia showed up with a gift that turned out to be a framed copy of the survey code that had started everything, mounted like the artifact it was. Standing on the porch where she'd once dragged a dying stranger through a blizzard, Lena married that stranger and promised to build a life with him that honored both their pasts and their possible future. Her father would have liked Adrian, she thought, would have appreciated his determination to make things right, his devotion to Emma, his willingness to admit when he was wrong and work to fix it. And her father would have been proud of her for leaving the mountain when she needed to, for fighting for justice, for taking the terrifying risk of letting someone close enough to matter. The land trust thrived. Emma grew up knowing she had two parents who loved her and a stepmother who taught her to read survey codes and stand up to bullies. Lena kept the cabin, used it as a retreat when the world got too loud, brought her family there to remember where she'd come from and how far they'd all traveled. Some storms destroyed everything in their path, but others, the ones you survived, the ones you fought through together, those storms cleared the way for something new to grow. Standing on her porch years later, watching Emma chase her own kids through the same snow that had once nearly killed them all, Lena thought about the night she'd pulled Adrian from that wrecked SUV, how she'd hated him, how impossible it would have seemed that he'd become her husband, her partner, the person she trusted most in the world. Life, it turned out, was full of impossible things that became real if you were brave enough to let them. Adrian came out to join her, slipping an arm around her waist, following her gaze to where their family played in the snow. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Storms," Lena said, "and survival, and how sometimes the things that almost destroy you end up saving you instead." Deep thoughts for a Tuesday afternoon. "Blame the mountain. It makes me philosophical." He kissed her temple, comfortable and familiar after years of practice. "You want to head back inside? It's freezing out here." In a minute, Lena leaned into his warmth, watched the mountains she'd known her whole life, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The past couldn't be changed. Her father was still gone. The years in isolation couldn't be reclaimed. The fraud had still happened. The pain had still been real. But she'd survived it. They both had. And from that survival, they'd built something worth having. Not perfect, not smooth, but real and solid and theirs. And that, Lena thought as snow began to fall again, as her family laughed and played and lived, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.